Hey guys, it's Faye from Solar Flow, and I am back with a new noisy video. So apologies in advance, they're actually doing some work outside. It's pretty noisy, but I do believe that the information shared herein is going to be worth it. So if you can put up with a little bit of noise, you'll get some great information instead. So today's topic is a deep dive behind the veil energy read on weather modification. Is it real? How long has it been going on for? And what is the true meaning and purpose of it behind the veil? So if this sounds like an interesting topic to you, please stick around. And if not, I will catch you at another video. Now, I'm also going to recommend maybe putting on closed captioning. It's probably going to be noisy. This is the second such video that I've actually recorded. They don't appear to be stopping anytime soon. So I can't not record because they're doing work outside. So maybe closed captioning is going to be the win for the day. Now, as you guys also know, if you're not new here and you know, then my videos are about 98% channeled information, 1% personal opinion, and perhaps even 1% or up to 1% of anything that I may have heard, read, seen, or maybe even researched like 20 some odd years ago. But anything that is not channeled, I will say to you that this is not channeled. And the reason that I don't channel it, if you are new here, is because as a channeler, any research that I will do will actually stand as a barrier to the information that's coming in, because they sometimes do not go hand in hand. Again, I'm reading the energy behind the veil, and anything that has been put forth on the world stage is very much in front of the veil. So they're not necessarily congruent with one another. So I'm just going to put that out in advance. What I'm about to say right now, this is not channeled, but this is anything that I have experienced, read, seen, heard in the last 5 years or so. Which is, as we're going to start to discuss this concept of weather modification, I'm going to bring up some very, very interesting and perhaps irregular things that would lend itself to this idea of so-called weather modification. And so this just came out a few months ago. I remember someone had shared something like on social media about it. That for the first time, and I can't remember if it was 30 or 50 years, but in the first time in 30 or 50 years, the National Weather Institute has come out with something like 30 or 50 new cloud formations. Okay, so the last 30 to 50 years, none. And then suddenly in the last few months, they've come out and they've reported there's 30 to 50 new ones. Interesting and notable, one would say. Now, another thing that's been going on is it's been reported that Bill Gates actually has airplanes that he's sending up. He personally is sending up, and why they're letting him is a good, your guess is as good as mine, but they're letting him go up with his airplanes, and the airplanes are releasing things into the sky that are meant to block the sun out. And it's being said that this is to help with, what else? Climate change. But there must be another reason that does not have to do with climate change. Why one might want to block out the sun. Might it have something to do with crop production? Okay. Then very, very recently, this happened just the last 10 days or so in California. We had about close to a week of rain nonstop, and it was also quite cold, like unseasonably cold for us here. And there was snow at the Hollywood sign. And then a friend even sent me a video from her backyard. She had hail. And she had a thin layer of snow in her backyard, and she lives even further south of LA. She lives like in the Orange County area. So it's even warmer down there than it is up here. And she had snow. Interesting. Then there's also the airplanes and chemtrails. Very, very notable, very, very interesting. There has also been, at the beginning of the winter, there was a cold front and a polar vortex that blanketed most of central United States, where it was also quite unseasonably cold. Last winter, I remember in Texas, it was so cold and the power grids were down that it was causing a lot of mayhem and devastation there. A few years ago, there was an earthquake in New York. Very, very unusual place for an earthquake. Plus, there have been volcanic eruptions located around the world in the last, I would say, 2 to 3 years, like higher concentration of them. Plus, we've also always had consistent in the central and southeastern parts of the United States, tornadoes and hurricanes. So how much of this is real? And the answer that I'm going to give you is probably going to be very, very frustrating. Because I'm going to honestly say, and this is, part of the 1% of personal opinion, I don't even think we know or understand what the weather, the actual genuine true weather is like in any particular place. Because they've had the weather modification in place for over 100 years. And I don't know when they first started keeping like weather records, but my guess is it's maybe somewhere around there. Maybe a little bit before, maybe it's a little bit after, maybe it was about 150 years ago or so. But it was very, very close together, which I find to be very interesting because if, for example, you were starting to keep weather records around the same time that you're modifying it, then the so-called history that has been recorded has been modified as well. So I don't believe we even know genuinely and truly what the real weather is like in any particular place around the world. Yes, for example, we can say that the poles are consistently cold. They're consistently snowy, right? They're also the furthermost point away from the equator. So that probably stands to reason. However, what if there was a way to modify all of the weather there as well, as a way to keep people away from these so-called inhospitable places around the globe? I'm not saying that's what's coming into play here. I'm just saying that's something that actually just came into my mind right now, and I wonder if maybe that has something to do with it. But we definitely do understand that the places that are, the locations around the globe that are closest to the equator have the least variances in weather. It's pretty consistently warm there year round. And then the further away you get from the equator, it does tend to get colder. And again, the poles, being the furthermost point away from the equator, are consistently the coldest. Now, they're also considered to be deserts because there is no, I think there's no rain that falls there. There could be snow that falls there, but there's no rain. And I think maybe that's like the distinction, or maybe I'm making that up. I don't even know. Again, I don't research my videos. Now, let's talk a little bit about how did this weather modification come into play? What was the origin point of it, or the original point in which this was starting to be explored? And I'm going to say that it was not from early on, the early onset of it. It was not evil. It was not with ill intention. Because go back and even look at like what we know about Benjamin Franklin. He was outside in a rainstorm with a kite and I think like a key, and he was trying to reproduce the effects of lightning. It's not because he wanted to direct lightning anywhere. It was because he was somebody that had a very, very curious mind, and he wanted to try to come to understand the way in which lightning works better. And this is the way that it was shown to me in the early days of the origin point of so-called weather modification, that it was not with malicious intent at all. It was with people that were genuinely and truly very, very curious in their observation of weather, that they wanted to try to come and understand it, but not that they wanted to control it. There's a difference. They were very, very curious. And just like there was a Benjamin Franklin that went outside in a rainstorm with a key and a kite to try to recreate lightning, there were people that were observing the weather patterns in their particular location, and they were noting it. And they were noting, for example, things that we would like take for granted, but they were kind of noting like seasonally. Okay, so in their particular place where they lived in the winter, how much snow did they, for example, get? How much rain did they get? What were the weather variances in it? And there were people that were noticing it. There were people that were not noticing it. And then there were people that were noticing and they were like, I wonder if there was a way that we could extend our rainy season so that we could have a better harvest of our crops. I wonder, it's quite warm in the spring. I wonder if that's going to have an adverse effects on the crops. They were noticing it, they were curious about it, and they were starting to tinker with their understanding of the way that the weather worked to make their lives more balanced, and perhaps one could even say easier. So that was the true origin point of these people that were getting into it. Maybe they were like very, very handy, and they could try to build things that would create some sort of weather modification, but it was not too directed at other places all around the globe. It was done really with the intention of trying to just make life for themselves, maybe their village, maybe their community, better for all of them. But that changed. And I'm going to say that changed maybe somewhere around 70 years ago or so. Because that was the point in which it was shown to me that the cabal actually became very, very involved in weather modification. So maybe there was some outliers who had been doing weather modification prior to that, again, not with ill intent, but then when the cabal came in, it of course became with ill intent. Now let's talk a little bit about why they had ill intent. So first and foremost, if, for example, you could create rain clouds, and those rain clouds could be directed to various parts around the globe, perhaps parts of the globe where there is not a lot of rain, and it's a very, very dry environment, and it's a place that really can't grow crops because of it. Maybe there's a lot of famine there as well. So if someone had the ability to direct rain clouds to this part of the world, that would greatly beneficially enhance the lives of the citizens in this particular location. So first of all, by withholding it, you are denying people things that can enhance the quality of their life. You're also, one could say, holding them into a more low vibration state because they need to constantly be contending with the fact that there could be famine there. There might not be enough food for them to feed their children or themselves. So it's a great way of holding power and control over certain parts of the world if you can actually control their weather. Now, that's on the one hand. On the other hand, now this is something that actually had come up when I had done the video on extraterrestrials, which is that, let's say the United States government already had UFOs. They have them in bunkers underground by Area 51. Let's say they have the understanding and the knowledge and the key to get those to work. But what they want to do is they want to take the brightest scientific minds. So maybe perhaps it's the brightest people that have an understanding of physics or astrology or astronomy or planetary, I don't even know, evolution, planetary understanding. Or the greatest scientific minds at that time that relate to engineering. But you want to lock them down because they are so clever and so bright that if they are left to their own devices, they could actually make very meaningful contributions to humanity. So what will you then do? You want to lock them down onto the dark side, even if it doesn't appear to be the dark side, because you want to get them away from the light side. So what they'll do in a case like that is they will actually monitor, let's say universities like MIT. They'll monitor any of the top tiered universities in the country. And then when these people are graduating, they might approach them and they might say, hey, you have really great academic skills. We have this project we're working on. We want to show it to you. We want to bring you on board. But here's the thing. We have to have you sign a non-disclosure because this is not something that's generally known to the population. So we're going to have you come in. We're going to bring you in, but you cannot talk about this. And we need to guarantee that you're not going to talk about it. That's their way of locking them down. And they will then bring those people, let's say, into a place like Area 51, where they already have the key. They already have all the information. But they're going to get these people to sign a non-disclosure agreement where they can never talk about this publicly. They'll bring them in with the so-called intention to reverse engineer it, right? We have this UFO that's crashed. We don't know how to make it work. We want you to figure it out. We want you to figure out how to make it work. They already know how to make it work, but they're locking him down with something that is meaningless because it's a way of keeping his mind away from other pursuits that could be benefiting humanity. It's locking him down to something they already know the answer to, but it's to take him away from anything else. And it's also locking him down from his ability to speak about it. So in the early days, they were actually doing this as well with the people that were very, very highly creative, highly, highly curious, and were on the forefront of weather modification. But perhaps these same people were like, well, I'm seeing how much good this is doing for my own community. I wonder if this can then be directed to other places around the world. So they're taking them away from something that can benefit and help humanity and locking them down and having them do maybe meaningless things, or maybe they're having them do so-called, very meaningful research, but the research is never going beyond the research point. It's getting stuck there because they don't really want to help people. Again, imagine you can direct rain to parts of the country that don't know anything but famine, or parts of the world that don't know anything but famine. And imagine the impact that would have on those places around the globe. You want to keep people in servitude, that's a great way to keep them in servitude. So that was one of the reasons that they came in to modify the weather. But there's two reasons. And the second reason is because anyone that is in the cabal has stepped away from the light side. They have stepped away from Team High Vibe, and they are now on the so-called dark side. And here's the example that I've given in the past, which is quite apropos, especially in this case. Let's say there's a solar-powered iPhone charger, and you're out in your garden. You are planting in the springtime. You are in the process of creating. Now you are outside in the sun, and you have a solar-powered iPhone charger, so your phone is just chilling like on a table near you, charging because of the solar-powered charger. You're out, you're connected to what we know to be eternal, even though scientifically it's not. They say that at some point the sun will burn out, but we know every single day when we wake up, whether or not we see the sun, right? Maybe there's clouds, but we know the sun is a constant. It's always there. But let's say somebody is not in the garden planting seeds in the springtime. They're not creating for the good, for the light. Maybe they're in a basement. Maybe they're working on AI technology in a basement. So they are not in a position where they can utilize the constant. They cannot allow their phone to be charged with a solar powered charger. So they would need to, in that case, plug their phone into a wall outlet to charge it because they are not in the light. So take that away from the strictly three-dimensional example I just gave you, where it's not where you're outside versus inside, in the sun versus away from the sun. Let the sun now be a representation of God, the divine. So if somebody is with the divine, then they are in a state of constant, or they're in a state where they can constantly be drawing upon good energy to create, to inspire. But if they're down in the basement, they are disconnected from the divine. So they have to utilize other secondary, darker sources to draw their power in. That is what is going on with the members in the cabal. They have stepped away from the divine. So everything that they do then is to disprove God. And I had discussed this in my video on CERN. I'll link that down below if you want to go back and watch that. But it's with the intention, because they are disconnected from God and from source. They not only want to take all of us away from it. If we're not with God, you can't be with God. But in addition to wanting to take us away from it, they want to go a step further and they want to disprove God altogether. And how do you disprove God? One great way is through the weather. We no longer need God to send us rain for our crops. We no longer need God for anything. And where might we be seeing this societally as well? We no longer need God to determine what our gender is, because we can create our own gender. It's not just two genders. It's not just men and women. There's like hundreds of genders now. We don't even need God for gender. We're not only creating a new gender in name, we can physically play God through scientific work and scientific research. We can give you a whole new physical gender as well. We no longer need God to create consciousness via a soul. We're creating consciousness artificially with AI. So understand that this is one piece in a much larger puzzle, which is all with the intention of disproving God, because they are so disconnected from God. Okay, so those were the two main purposes in wanting to get involved with the weather modification. It was to, first of all, identify and locate who is on the forefront, who is the brightest and the best that is actually on the cutting edge of weather modification. We're going to now lock them down so they can't do things for the good of humanity. And it's also where we are now going to modify the weather because we're playing God now. Now, what was also shown to me is that, and this is actually where the iPhone example is going to come in quite handy. So let's say, for example, you have an iPhone 8. And your iPhone 8 is, it's an older model. It's a few years old. And maybe you've dropped it a bunch of times. So, the back of the phone is banged up. There's scratches on it. Maybe even like your front screen, it's not like completely cracked, but maybe it's got like chips and dings and dents into it. So the exterior of your iPhone may appear to be a hunk of junk. But that iPhone, you've also just done the software update, and it has iOS 16. So it has the latest and the greatest software, but the hardware appears to be quite junky. And maybe somebody's going to see your banged up looking phone and they're going to be like, yo, dude, I think it's time to get a new phone. Because the way it appears on the outside is that it's a hunk of junk. So what was shown to me is that they have these locations like deep out in the ocean, not like a place where you could see it like with your bare eyes, like on the land, or if you're taking like a boat ride. No, it's like deep out into the sea, excuse me, where they have these facilities, these platforms. It was shown to me as very, very large platforms where they're above water, where they have these hunk of junk looking weather modification tools that are there. But even though it's old hardware, the internal operating of it has been updated many, many times. And this was done with the intention of, first of all, allowing it to appear as though if anybody ever did actually discover it, and they're like, yo, dude, I think that's, being used for weather modification, it would be like, what are you talking, like, look, that's just junk. That can't modify the weather. So even though it appears as if it is junk, the internal operating system of it is like in tip-top shape. but it is being left to look as if it is in a state of disrepair. So that way, if it is ever discovered at any point in the future, it's kind of like a layer of plausible deniability. Now, I was also shown that a few other things came into play that are satisfying the cabal's laws of so-called karmic retribution. And this I've talked about, a lot in a lot of my most recent videos, but this idea of what so-called karmic retribution is that they need to tell us what they're doing, even if once we've been notified, we choose to perceive it to be fictional. So the example that I've been using a lot lately is, for example, like with the Marvel movies, where they are showing people that have perhaps superhuman abilities and skills, but that is being perceived as fiction, and it's fake, and it's fantasy. So they are outing what human potential actually is, but it's under the guise of it being fictitious. So they're telling us, which is assuaging their laws of karmic retribution. They're telling you how you choose to perceive it, how you choose to receive it fictitiously, that's on you. They've already told you. And this actually came a lot into play with what has been going on in Northern California, notably over the last few years, which is these so-called forest fires that have been breaking out, where these forest fires are now also starting to, they're not just remaining in the forest, but they're actually going into places where people are living. And what I found so notable and to be so interesting is that, there's been people in the last few years that are coming out and they're kind of questioning it. And they're like, okay, we get that it's a forest fire, but do forest fires flip cars over? Do forest fires cut cars in half? Do forest fires come into a neighborhood where people live, and as if there was a barrier, only like from neighbors, one house to the next, one house is completely burned down to the ground, and the house next to it doesn't even have like signs of any, not even like smoke next to it. How could that be? As if there was a line down the middle. So what was shown to me in regards to this is that this is also assuaging their laws of karmic retribution, which is by allowing the voice of dissent, or allowing the voice of these people that are questioning it to come out. But they're also framing it in the way, these are just conspiracy theories. The people who are saying it are just conspiracy theorists. Because the media has, or at least up until recently, has had a very, very strong hold on what is the information that has been allowed to get out and what are they suppressing. So if these voices of dissent are even allowed to come out, it is so that it is satisfying the laws of karmic retribution, even if it's being framed as a conspiracy, and even if anybody that hears it is taking it in and they are saying, well, that's just a crazy conspiracy. They're telling you what's possible. How you choose to accept it, that's not on them, that's on you. They're telling you. Now, and yes, they do actually have these. It was shown to me as like a laser beam. I don't know if it's like literally a laser beam or this is just the way in which it was like a representation of how it was shown to me. But it was shown to me actually as like a laser beam that can, first of all, it can start these fires. And that's also why it can be like there's a line going between neighbors' houses where one house is completely unaffected and the other house and everything on the other side of that house is completely like destroyed and devastated. And that's also why there are like these, the cars that have been like sliced down the middle as if it was sliced with a laser, because it was. But it was shown to me this way, and I'm not saying it is definitely that way, because every time I've kind of like gone back to it and tried to look at it, it was shown in a somewhat nebulous way, which was a beam of light coming out of a cloud. Now, every time I tried to look into it, it was shown the exact same way, a beam of light coming out of a cloud. Now, sometimes when something is not shown to me, when I put my attention and energy into it, what I'll then do is I'll allow my mind to relax when I'm around the topic to see if, without the directed attention towards it, if something will actually come in. And no matter how many times I tried to look into it, or I tried not to look into it while trying to look into it, it was shown to me the exact same way. So I'm going to say in this case, when information is not revealed to me like this, it's because at this particular time, it's something that I'm not meant to discuss, or I'm not meant to disclose, or it's not meant to be known. So I didn't push it there after, I just tried and I did my best and then I let it go. Now, what was also shown to me about two things, so-called natural disasters and so-called other disasters not of the natural kind, is that they are two sides of the same coin, but in regards to money laundering, which I thought was so interesting, and I'm going to explain what that means. So what was shown to me is, for example, if we're gonna continue to follow this idea of these so-called forest fires in like Northern California. So there's a so-called forest fire, and it's not just where it's causing devastation in a forest, it's where it's destroying whole communities, houses, and like real estate development property. So what will then happen is, after there is this so-called natural disaster, whoever is in charge of that particular, maybe it's the governor, maybe it's the senator, they're then going to request financial aid from the United States government. They're going to say, we have this mass area of devastation on our hands. We need financial assistance from the government to help our citizens, or to try to clean it up. Now, this is where the money laundering actually comes in. Because if that governor is perhaps reading the script that the cabal has given him, and he is towing the line, and or maybe, I'm not sure if towing the line means you're on the verge of stepping out of it, or if you're staying within the bounds of it. So we're going to say they're staying within the bounds of what they're meant to be doing. They're a puppet of the cabal. They're reading their script. They're doing what they're supposed to be doing. Then they will get this government assistance, which is supposed to be directed towards the citizens that have been affected. It doesn't get to them. Or maybe a small part of it trickles down to them, but it's not really helping them. That money is then payment to line the pocket of whoever is in charge there and all of the people that are around him.
Right, exactly. And then that's a healthy, like, roles and everything, like.
So this is done to, first of all, keep people in line. It's a reward, one could say, for doing what you're supposed to be doing. And this was also shown to me in the way in which I was understanding that it's not necessarily getting to the people that are affected, because, like, look at what happened. I forgot how many years ago it was now, but there was a very, very devastating natural disaster in Louisiana. But what came to pass a number of years later was that despite all of the money that was allocated to them by the government, those houses for the people that had been displaced were not being built. They had built, like, maybe, I think I had, and again, this is like, you know, I read this I don't know how many years ago. They had built, like, let's say 5 houses. How many millions of dollars did they get to help those displaced people? And it was actually, in the article, it was disclosed that it was private organizations, such as like a Habitat for Humanity, where people were volunteering their time and their skills that were going down there to build houses for the displaced people that was actually doing more for the people than the money that was allotted for them. And that is a huge tell to the fact that the money that is being sent there is not actually being sent to the people that's affected. It's given to the top. And it's either given to the top as a reward because you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, or another way of saying this is, we want to make sure that you're going to stay in line. So how do we make sure that you're going to stay in line and you're going to do what you're supposed to do? We're going to pay you. And here's also the thing, because now if they're being paid for it and that ever came to be disclosed that they are being paid personally, but it's not helping the people, that will ruin them. It will ruin their career, any political aspirations that they may have. It will ruin their reputation. So it's a way of keeping them completely beholden and in line. Now, let's take another example, not of a so-called natural disaster, but a different kind of a disaster, because this is the other side of the coin, which is, look at what happened in East Palestine, Ohio right now, where a train derailed. Now, any train derailing would be very, very unfortunate, right? Because there's going to be a lot of chaos and devastation where it's been derailed, but now we're going to take that a very, very unfortunate event of what could happen anytime a train derails, and what are we going to do with that? We're going to include toxic chemicals. What are we going to do with those toxic chemicals? We're going to say that if they are left to their own devices, this could be very, very bad. So we're going to take matters into our own hands and we're going to burn those toxic chemicals. Interesting. And then what are we going to do after this has happened, where people are going back into their town and they're reporting they have headaches? They're reporting they're having respiratory issues. They're vomiting. They're vomiting blood. We're going to go and we're going to tell those people, it's safe. You can go back. You can drink your water. You can plant in your soil. It's safe. But you might want to throw out your mattress and your sofa and anything else that's of a fabric nature because it's absorbing all the toxic chemicals. Why might that be done? This is done for one of two reasons. It's either because the person in charge, again, maybe the senator or the governor or somebody that's high up as an official in a particular county or a state, they are not behaving. They are not doing what they have been told to do. You are given a script, you have to abide by our rules, you're not. You're going rogue. So what are they going to do? They're going to create a natural disaster there. And then what are they also not going to do? They're not going to provide any assistance. So they're going to create the mess, and then they're not even going to help clean that mess up. And that is a way to punish whoever it is that is in charge of that particular place that may be stepping out of line. They may want to go rogue. They may want to actually do some good instead of some bad. Now that may also be done as a way to punish the citizens in that particular county or in a particular state because they vote the wrong way. So look at everything that's coming out about East Palestine. It's a red stronghold. Maybe that's a way to punish the people there. Something to think about. So it's opposite sides of the same coin. When these either so-called natural or unnatural destructions, devastation is being caused, it's either a way to launder the money and to pay off politicians in a way that appears to be above board. They're getting assistance for the citizens of their town, their county, their state, whatever it is, not making it to them. But it's a way to pay them off for staying in line and keeping them in line. And it's also a way to punish people if they are not staying in line. And what was so also interesting was the amount of train derailments that have been going on in, let's say, the past 2 weeks now. And my kind of feeling about that was what happened in East Palestine was so big and so notable, was a way to almost like remind the other places that something similar was going to happen, but for those people to see. It was like a warning shot to them. Look what just happened in East Palestine. They're not getting any assistance. So when there's a train derailment, I think there was like 2 even in Texas within a few days of each other. There's been one even in like Greece now. It's like there's suddenly this explosion of them all over the place, right? So this was done as a warning shot, so they know you better play your part if you want to get financial assistance, or we're not going to even help you. So keep that in mind as well. What's been the fallout for these other disasters that are going on connected to the trains and connected to what's on board with these trains? And might there be some more in the future as well? Because I actually believe that there's going to be. And here's why. And this is, again, like the 1% that's actually personal opinion. Which is that in order for us to... not in order for us to do anything. It's more to say that in the next few years, while all of the systems are starting to come down, what's going to have to be revealed about all of these systems is the corruption that is associated with it. So that way, when it comes down, anything that was of the dark, anything that was hidden, anything that was devoid of divine in it, is going to have to come down, and we're going to have to see how disconnected from the divine, how without good intent these things have been, how corrupt they have all been, so that way when we rebuild them, we can rebuild them without any corruption to it. So I actually believe that there's going to be more of these things happening in the future for 2 reasons. There's a lot of actually 2s in this video. 2 reasons for everything. But I actually believe it's going to happen for 2 reasons. One of them is to serve almost as breadcrumbs for people that are going to wake up in the future. They're going to wake up maybe a year, 2, 5, however many years from now, they're going to wake up and they're going to be able to look back retroactively at all of these so-called natural and unnatural disasters. And it's going to be a way for them to kind of connect the dots in their understanding of, oh my goodness, all of these things are connected. Oh my goodness, all of these things are somehow not coincidental. They're beyond the scope of something that could even be considered a coincidence. Like, how many train derailments were there in like a 2-week period? And for anyone who's familiar with 17 and the video that I did on the so-called 17 drops, there's first of all this line, how many coincidences until it's mathematically impossible? So that's a way of us understanding there's going to be a time where all of these so-called coincidences are going to be revealed not to be coincidences. But then it's also creating a path of breadcrumbs, just like with the 17 drops, what do they say? Future proves past. And I had talked a little bit about this with like those, the deltas. The delta is a date in which there is something that came out in a 17 drop. I think I'd given the example of like December 19th, 2019. It will say something that actually will connect to something that came out December 19th of 2022, but connected it in such a way that it's like, that can't be also a coincidence. That has to be scripted. So it's also this idea of future proving past with the deltas, but also for anybody that wakes up at any point in the future proves past. There's going to be a trail of these breadcrumbs for anybody in the future that, should they so be inclined, they can look back and they can be like, oh wow, I see that now. There's a clear path. All of these things were a disclosure of some kind. And I also do believe that our understanding of the way that the weather works, and the understanding of not just the understanding of the way the weather works, but in any way that we think that the weather actually is for any particular place, can very much be prone to change. Because again, if it's been modified for 100, 150 years, anything like that, we don't really even necessarily know what the actual weather blueprint of any particular location in the world is. So I think that we can actually start to see very, very big changes in, first and foremost, our understanding of the weather, but in also our understanding of the weather as it connects to a particular location. And I think that's all I have. I'm just going to review my notes really, really quickly here. Yeah, and so here's one more thing that was actually shown to me, which was that, again, a lot of the places that there is weather variations of some kind, so that is done with the intention, future-proof past. We're going to look at that in the future and we're going to be like, oh yeah, I see that so clearly for what it is now. But I was actually even also shown that there's certain places where they may try to tamper with the weather. And the way in which they tamper with the weather, they actually can't even do any more harm or devastation or destruction than in what is going on naturally in certain places around the world. And one of those places that was actually shown to me is Florida. And that, for example, so I haven't been to Florida in many, many years. I have a lot of friends that live there though now. And, you know, they're always saying like the weather in Florida, it's so funny, it's so fickle, because you could have like absolutely beautiful weather in the morning, and then a tropical storm will come in and it will rain, it could pour, and the sky will be black, and it could rain, pour for a few minutes, a few hours, and then it passes and the sky is completely blue again, the ground dries, and there's no evidence that it even rained. So that was actually shown to me as being true weather for that particular place. And that even if they had tried to modify the weather and make it worse than it is, they can't do worse than what actually happens there. And it has to actually do something to do with the fact that Florida, or at least the southernmost part of Florida, it has East Coast and it also has West Coast. So there's parts of southern Florida that are on the East Coast and they have water by the Atlantic, but then I think it's what is it? It's like what's it called? I want to say inlet. It's not an inlet. It's like there's water on the west coast of California, the west coast of Florida as well. And there's something very, very notable about the fact that southern Florida has the influence of both the East Coast and water and the west side of Florida and the water that is there as well, that is actually contributing to the very, very interesting and non-traditional kind of weather that they have there. And that can actually also contribute to I think it's and I always confuse hurricanes and tornadoes. So if you know what I'm talking about, comment down below. But Florida gets, again, one of the two, and I don't remember which, but that is actually an indication of the way in which Florida is shaped, that it is the most southern point, that there's water all kind of like surrounding Florida, from the east of it down to the southernmost point of it, up to the west coast portion of it, not the west coast of the United States, the west coast of Florida. And that it is something actually that has to do geographically in the way that Florida is shaped and with the convergences of all of the different water and the water temperature that's there. That has actually been shown to be as being natural. But if you know what I'm talking about, or if you're from Florida, please comment down below and let me know that. But I think that's all I have to say. I'm just going to do a quick recap. I want to make sure that I had covered everything here. That not all of the weather modification that we have seen from the beginning of time has been of ill intent. It started off with people that were genuinely very, very curious about the way that weather works, maybe just natural curiosity. Maybe it was, I want to see if I could get more rain, for example, in this particular location where I live, so we'll have a better harvest season. But then at some point the cabal did come in, and that was done, again, 2 reasons. First, it was the disproving of God. We do not need God for nothing. We don't need God for our crops. We don't need God for anything. And it was a way of also locking down those best and brightest minds who would be inclined to want to help humanity by perhaps directing weather to places where they have bad weather or they have famine, to send rain there so that it would improve the quality of the people that live there. So it was done with that purpose of locking them down. It was also done with the intention of, for people that were going to wake up in the future. So again, two reasons there: past proves future, but also a way of showing us that nothing is a coincidence, not even the weather. Then it was also, there's two sides to the same coin in the reason that this is done, and it has to do with money laundering or the withholding of specific money, which is, we're going to reward people that are following the script and doing what we want them to do by creating these natural, so-called, or unnatural disasters. We're going to give them money because they're doing what they're supposed to do. That's also a way of locking them down and keeping them beholden to us, because if that ever came out, they'd be screwed. And it's also a way of punishing other places or other governors or other politicians that are not doing what they're supposed to be doing, and a way of also punishing the citizens that live there because they're voting the wrong way, one could say. So I hope that you guys have found this video to be interesting or thought-provoking or insightful in some way. I hope that you've been able to kind of like tolerate the noise that's kind of been in and out. And as always, until next time, stay in the high vibration.